Hello, so I'm here today with Naya. She is a 7-year-old Siberian Husky, and I have 2 more Huskies, but I'm using her today because she doesn't know her commands super well. So I'm going to be working on showing you guys these commands while also working on her, so you kind of know what to expect from a dog who doesn't know commands yet. So the very first thing I want to point out is that she is in a specific dog pulling sport harness. You want to make sure that when you're doing any sort of pulling sports that they are in a harness designed to actually pull. And the reason for that is if they don't have this harness on, a lot of harnesses come across the shoulder here and they're going to restrict movement, or they might cross over here and this is where their shoulder blades come out and it'll restrict their movement again, or in the neck it might choke them. So it's just really important that if you're having your dog pulling and if you're encouraging pulling, you want to make sure that you have them in the right equipment so that they're comfortable and that they're going to do their best. So once you have your dog in a pulling harness, you can tie them up to a tree or a stump. I just have Naya on this tie out here, you can see the end. And I've given her a decent amount. This is probably going to be further than like a classic bikejoring line. It's pretty long. But to start off, make sure that your dog is comfortable in their harness and that they're used to it before you do any of this. But the very first thing I'm going to do is go to the end of her line. Naya, come here. Line out. And once she has it tight, line out, come on. I have a treat in my hand here. Come here. Naya, come. Come on. And she's gonna be a hard one to get it completely tight because before I adopted her, she was trained for 7 years of her life not to pull. Naya, come on. Yes. So anytime that they have tension on that line, reward them. And eventually you're going to transition from, instead of being in front of them, to being at the base of this line, whether it be in the ground on a tie out or on a tree. And you're going to say line out, and hopefully by that point they will know it, or you can take your treat here, Naya, line out, and show it to them and toss it. But you want to make sure that you're tossing it far enough because obviously that wasn't enough to get the line tight. Naya, ready? Come on. Come on. Line out. Come on. Come here. The other thing I will say, because as you can see, Naya's not super food motivated. She's interested. Yes, good girl. She just got the line tight. If your dog isn't super food motivated, you can try using some like really high value treats like hot dogs or ham or fresh chicken. Because like classic treats, and these are what I'm using is some Zook training treats. They're fine. They excite my other 2 dogs, and in my camper I have Zelda screaming at me because she's not out here training. Come on. But for the average dog, they're not going to be super excited and willing to work for them. So like Naya, she's interested in them, but she's not like going crazy over them. And ideally you want them to be going crazy over the treat. Okay, so I brought out Zelda because she's a little more food motivated, and you'll be able to see what a good line out looks like. So again, I have the treats in my hand. Zelda, line out! Yes! And it's hard to see here, but you can see there's tension on that line. She's lifting it up off the ground. Line out! Yes! And you'll also see on her harness and her back legs, they're digging into the ground versus Naya, who is just kind of standing there. Another thing you can do if your dog is following you around, but then when you go to use the line out, they're not doing it, you can put them into a sit and a wait. Come. Yes, good girl. And ask them to come. And then eventually when they're doing this enough and efficiently enough, that's when you start labeling it and saying line out, or whatever command you want to use, as long as you're being consistent. So this is my dog Ezio. He lives to pull. He understands that pulling is a ton of fun, and he is also highly, highly mood driven. So he doesn't know this yet, but I do have some things in my pocket. Ezio. so he can smell it. And this is a dog who's going to have a really strong line out. You can already see he's already doing it. The line is off the ground. So I'm actually going to put him in a sit here. Sit! Wait! Up! Wait! Line out! Good boy! And he naturally sits when he lines out, and that's okay. Honestly, I personally prefer that because he will line out and he will sit at the end of the line and he will wait until I am going. Unless there are other dogs around who are already going, and then he goes crazy. Line out! Good boy! Yes! Line out! Line out! Good boy! And if your dog is barking and going crazy, that's okay. The goal of this is just to make it a ton of fun and enjoyable for your dog. Ezio, line out. Ez, line out. Yes! And he is at the end of his line. He's doing a really good job. Having basic obedience with your dog before doing any mushing is going to help you out a lot. Not only will you be using some of those commands, like if you need your dog to wait, you can put him in a sit or stay, you know, but it also builds a relationship with your dog, and they're going to understand and want to listen to you. The other way that's a little easier to teach line out is if your dog loves to pull already, if they're a husky or if they're another type of sledding dog, or they're just really enthusiastic about pulling, because any breed can love to pull, take them on a walk, put them in this pulling harness, and anytime they have that line taut like this, yes, good girl Naya, good line out, you just tell them. You tell them what they're doing and you label it, and then they will start doing it on command. So once you have that line out down pretty good, you can start teaching hike or go. And this one will come naturally to most dogs because most dogs don't like to sit still and just wait. And so you can do this on walks, and once they're good and lined out like this, you can say hike and just start moving. And eventually they will associate that with it's time to go. One nice thing about going with a group of people is that all of their dogs will most likely already know the commands, and your dog will catch on incredibly fast. And dogs also don't like to be left behind, so if everyone's dogs are going hike, 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 and they're going, your dog isn't gonna just sit there and wait, most likely. One of the hardest things to teach, in my opinion, is to get a dog to slow down and stop. And one thing that helps is having really good brakes on your rig, whether that be a sled or a bike. But you do want to teach them how to slow down and stop in case your brakes fail or your brakes aren't strong enough. And if you have a really large team, ultimately your brakes aren't going to do a whole lot. So what I have found beneficial for my dogs is if they are walking slow, like we are going pretty slow here, I will again label it like I did with the hike and just tell her good, whoa, good, stop. And this is one thing that my dogs have a hard time on, especially if they're with other dogs who are continuing to go. One thing that does help with any of these commands is running your dog with other teams. So if your dog is dog friendly and you can hook them up with other teams, if their dogs are slowing down and listening to that command, your dog is going to slow down as well. Okay, so I switched out to Zelda here because Naya was done with our 3-minute walk. So as you can see, Zelda already has a better line out. She knows what it feels like to put pressure on that harness, and she's more comfortable with it. Zelda, line out. Come on, line out. Yes, good girl. So again, that's just that labeling. So when you have go and stop down, you can start to teach turns. And we're gonna come up to a little split here, but just to give you a second, I'm gonna explain this. So as we get up to this turn here, right turns are G, or you can say right. You can say whatever you want, but mushers are gonna say G typically, and lefts are gonna be ha. So again, say whatever you want, but I'm going to be using G and ha. One way to remember that is left-handed people are funny. Ha ha ha. So in my opinion, the best way to teach dogs, especially dogs who already love to pull, is when you get up to the turn, you are going to tell them the command, either left or right, or ha or G, whichever you choose. And if they go the way that you tell them to go, start speeding up. This will either look like you walking faster, or if you're already on a bike, you're going to be pedaling faster so that they get to run faster, because dogs love to run. If they go the wrong way, or they are not going yet, you're going to slow down. The goal of this is to teach them that going the right way that you ask them to go is a lot of fun. It's going to put less pressure on them and make their run easier and more enjoyable. All right, so we're going to go Zelda hike. Yes, Zelda G. And she already knows her lefts and rights, so that's helpful. And we'll get to on-bys because as you can see, she's distracted. But one thing I want to point out is right now I am just working on commands. I am trying to keep it light and fun and enjoyable. And if I was really stuck up on her being interested in this little thing here, we have foxes come and live down here, she is gonna get nothing out of this. Whereas if I let and stop her sniff, because we're not actually joring yet, I personally don't have an issue with this. We're not on a bike, we're just walking, we're just working on commands and keeping it fun. One mistake that a lot of people who are new to joring make is that if your dog turns around or puts pressure, or it doesn't put pressure, like they relieve the pressure off of this line and it's loose, they just keep going and they keep walking and their dog keeps going and then they're just running next to them. Well, they're not pulling, and that's not what we're trying to teach them. We're trying to teach them to stay out front, keep that tension on there. So if your dog slows down, and I'm gonna get going here. So Zelda, come on. Hike. Hike, hike. We're going here. If she slows down, the second she slows down, I am also slowing down. And the reason for that is the tension stays on there. And she knows just because she slows down doesn't mean that her work gets to stop and that she's done and that I'm pedaling or I'm running, however we're doing it. I will also add in here, it's easier to train if you have a leash with a bungee attached to it. This one doesn't. This is just a regular leash. You can use a real gang line, or if you do have a leash swinging around with a bungee in it, it's going to be easier to train them to keep that tension on, because it gives them a little bit of give, and if they're not completely pulling but that tension is still there, they're able to take just like, it's almost like just taking a break for them. But, or like if they stop for a second, that leash is just gonna allow them for just like a little bit of give, and that's okay. A little bit of give, a little bit of, they're not completely pulling, that is okay. Because if you have a leash like this and it's just, there's literally no stretch to this leash, anytime they stop, anytime I stop, they're gonna feel it. So if I slow down, they're gonna feel it, and that's okay. It's just ultimately easier with a bungee leash or a gang line with a bungee installed. Okay, so I'd just like to point out that I'm stopped here because my dog stopped and she's really focused on me. It's because I have treats and that's okay. But because she stopped, I stopped. So I'm not gonna keep going until she goes. And I can tell her to line out. Zelda, line out. Line out. Yes, good girl. Hike. Good girl. But if she didn't go right there, I would just wait. And I would not tell her, line out, line out, line out. I would not tell her, hike, hike, hike. Because ideally you want to say that command once so that when you're actually bikejoring or sledding with them, you aren't telling them that command several times and they think, oh, I only hike if I hear hike, hike, hike. So I switched her over to her collar here, and you can still teach lefts and rights on a collar. It can be a little harder because they're not always going to be out in front of you. But Zelda will walk generally a little bit up in front of me, and that's fine. The one difference here is that I'm not going to let her pull me, and that's just the difference between loose leash walking and pulling on her harness. Okay, so we're coming up to a turn here and we're gonna go right. So I'm gonna tell her that G word. And if she goes, then we'll speed up. And I actually do have treats on me, so Zelda G. Let's walk. G. And she started to go that way. Good girl. So in this case, if she was on her harness, I would speed up. And that would be running or you know, pedaling on the bike. Right now, I did just speed up walking a little bit, and that's fine on the collar as well. I do have treats on me too, but she was just excited to turn, so I'm going to take that as a win, because ultimately you do want to work away from the treats. When you're on a bike or a sled, you're not going to be able to treat them. Another command that you need to work on is G or ha over. There's different ways to say this, but essentially it just means they're scooting over to the left or the right. They're not making a complete turn, but they are moving over just enough so that if you need to pass someone or there's an obstacle in a road, you can get over just a little bit. Zelda, line out. Good girl. And you're gonna use, I would teach this once they already know their lefts and their rights, because when you're going down a trail, and especially one like this that there's not too much on either side, I can tell her Zelda G over, and she's gonna naturally turn to the right. Good girl. But because there's not a well-defined path here, she is most likely going to stay on the actual road, if that makes sense. So you will train that with both your right G and left ha. And again, just keep this training really fun. I'm not pushing her here. She's ran 11 miles in the past 24 hours, so she's also very tired, which means she's not pulling completely. But again, making that mistake of letting them have this loose slack while you are going is going to hurt you in the long run, because they're not going to want to work. Okay, so the final command that you want to teach is to turn around, and Zelda already knows that. But basically, what you can do, one way to teach this, is once they know that G, if they know it well enough, they will, or G or ha, either way, they will keep turning if you keep saying it. And I tell Zelda turn around, or G around, or ha around if I need her to go a specific direction. Turn around, she typically goes to the right. But eventually, if they know their turns right away, that G or ha and keep telling them is going to get them to turn around. And once they understand what you're asking them and you say G, 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 and they're turned around completely, yes, label it as G around or turn around or whatever you want to label it as. The one thing here is that might be confusing, considering I told you not to say a command several times in a row. But this, you're essentially telling them to do the same thing several times in a row, versus like if we take a right turn up there and I tell her G, 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 and she's not turning right, or she turns right on the third G, that's a little different. The other command that helps if you're trying to get them to turn around is come. So if they already know this is great. And you'll tell them to wait wherever they are. And you can say, turn around, come, come, come. Yes! And I do have treats with me, so I'll use that. The other method, of course, is if you're walking or on a bike, to speed up. And dogs who are really excited to pull will enjoy that. And keep these training sessions short, like you would with obedience training. I'd honestly say like 15-20 minutes tops, and then do that up. You could even do it a couple times a day, but do it frequently so that information is sticking into their brains. One command that's really important is teaching a solid on-by. So if you're passing someone or they see a squirrel, they're not going to bolt out and injure you, themselves, or other dogs or people. And one thing to help this is having a strong leave it before you even hook them up to a harness, and this will transfer over to an on-by. But another way to do this is have a friend who can walk with you. Put them on the trail, you know, up ahead the corner or whatever, and teach them, tell them leave it. If they leave it, good. And you can say leave it or run by or whatever command you want to use. As long as they're listening to that command, that's good. And same thing with turning. Slow down if they're not listening to you, and as soon as they do listen, speed up. The whole game is, pulling is really fun if you listen, and you'll help them out if they listen and they don't have to pull so hard. But if they're not listening, you're gonna go really slow, you're gonna get left behind. Yeah. One thing that I think is really important that gets overlooked with a lot of sled dogs is that having recall is really important, especially when you have harnesses like this X-back that they can wiggle out of. And this is something you can do like when your dog is a puppy, way before you even teach it any sort of sledding. And obviously huskies are not always going to listen. We know that they are a more stubborn, independent breed, but just having that training down and being able to do that is really helpful. Before I end this video, I do really want to emphasize that you can still loose leash walk and have a dog who pulls. And that is really why walking them on a collar, prong collar, or even I guess a head harness, and running them, or even working on commands, as long as they're pulling in the harness, is so important. Zelda knows that her collar means walking and that it's not time to pull, and that when the harness goes on, it's time to work.